Welcome everyone tonight. This is the third of our 1 hour workshops, and really pleased to have two different models of the winter night shelter presented. So Di Dersma is going to talk to us about what's happening at Wangaratta, and Joan McRae is going to share with us what happens at Shepparton. So Di, I think you were going to go first. Start by just talking a bit about the night shelter concept, and over to you, Di. Welcome.
Thank you. So thank you so much for inviting me to come and talk about something that's really close to my heart. Brian, please feel free to interrupt me because I can actually talk underwater, and I'm passionate about this. So about many things. I love the fact that you have a field days, which is all about mission. And thank you so much. So the Wang Night Shelter have begun about 4 years ago. And I'm going to assume that you don't know very much about that. So if I'm repeating things that you do know, then please forgive me. I also have a bit of a scratchy voice, so I'm hoping that you'll be able to hear me okay. Please forgive me if I cough. I won't mute in between, otherwise we'll be on off all night. So for many years, there have been people that have been involved in the lives of those that are homeless in Wangaratta in the northeast across many of the churches. And so the story of the Wang Night Shelter actually began a very, very long time ago. And I'm sure longer even than I know. It belongs in the heart of God. In the words of Matthew's Gospel, where Jesus says, when you cared for the least of these, the homeless, the naked, the poor, the hungry, you did that for me. And so for me personally, I've been involved as a minister here and a chaplain, and walked alongside many homeless people. And the beginnings of the homeless shelter here came out of frustration of not having a solution for the people who are homeless, who want a community and actually ultimately wanted to find Jesus. And so out of that frustration is often embedded our calling, the thing that God wants us to do. When we're so frustrated, we go, God, can you do something? And he says, well, why don't you do this? And so the story of the shelter came about from people asking us what we could do, from conversations among the local ministers here. And there was some local people that were living along the river, and they were being given eviction notices to move on, and there was nowhere for them to go. And so our local ministers began to say, we really need to do something. And I'd heard about the model of Stable One through Jenny Willits. Somebody gave me her phone number, and I rang her and said, coming down to Melbourne, can I come and talk to you? Because I believe we need a solution for the northeast, which is what you have started in Melbourne. And so the Stable One shelter begins in the church buildings. So they're offered up for people to sleep in as borrowed buildings. A team of volunteers gets together every night, and they set up a shelter that is welcoming and warm with a home cooked meal, and guests can stay over the evening and then for breakfast in the morning, and then the shelter packs down again. We didn't know much of that at that time. What our experience was that we were struggling to find the resources to do something that could make a difference. And then we felt like God said to us, just do what you can with what you have. And so what did we have? We had church buildings, we had people, we had a community that was carrying the heart of God. And so when I'd gone to speak with Jenny Willits and hear about the shelter, she said, this is possible in your town. This is what we have seen in the UK and in many other places, and will help support you to get this going in Wangaratta. So she came and spoke to the local ministers here in Wangaratta, and we said, let's give it a go. Unanimously amongst those that heard her speak, we said, we're going to give this a try, and we began to invite people to volunteer with us and start the process of beginning a shelter. Any questions so far? Or I'll keep going. Keep going. I want to read to you out of Isaiah, this beautiful scripture, which really is a call to action and a call to challenge. It's midway through Isaiah, and I'm going to read it out of the Message. And it's the prophet saying the words of God to us and talking about the things that we give up as part of worship to him, the things that affect our everyday lives. And God is saying, this is the kind of fasting I'm after, to break the chains of injustice, to get rid of exploitation in the workplace, to free the oppressed, to cancel debts. What I'm interested in seeing you do is share your food with the hungry, Invite the homeless poor into your homes, putting clothes on the shivering ill-clad, being available to your own families. Do this and the lights will turn on and your lives will turn around at once. Your righteousness will pave your way and the God of glory will secure your passage. And then you will pray and God will answer. You'll call out for help and I'll say, here I am. God has definitely done that with the shelter, and I want to share with you some stories. 4 years on, we've been running the shelter every year in slightly different circumstances, and of course through the pandemic that's been really difficult. But let me just share a few little snippets of stories, and if there are any questions around that, I'm happy to answer them. We ran a pilot program for the shelter in 2019, and that convinced us that this was a way to provide community. It wasn't like a soup kitchen where it was us giving to people and not being with them. It was like a family meal where we sat around a table together, where we slept in borrowed church buildings together, where we ceased to become guest and volunteer and we actually became community. And so when we hit the beginning of the pandemic, we began to struggle and say, God, can we do this? This is really difficult. And I remember meeting a friend of mine who's been homeless for about 11 years. And we had a coffee together, which we frequently do, the main street of Wangaratta, in front of one of the coffee shops because we weren't allowed inside at that point. And she paid for the coffee, which she would often not let me pay for the coffee. And I was talking to her and I said, what are we going to do for winter? We don't know if we're going to be able to run the shelter. And my friend walked past, another friend, and saw her, and I introduced them and we were talking about her dilemma. And he was so moved with compassion. He was a Christian from one of the churches who'd been involved in the shelter, and he pulled out his wallet. And I'll never forget, she looked at him and she said, no, I don't need your money. I need people. And that just struck me as such a confirmation of what we do with the shelter. We become community. We sit across the table together. We make the beds together. We have breakfast together. Really powerful. Sometimes I think Mother Teresa's quote about it being really fashionable to talk about the poor and not so fashionable to talk with them is a bit true. And one of the powerful things we've realised is that as people sit across the table with one another, they realise that we have a common need for one another and we have a common need for God. It's been incredibly powerful. One of the questions we're often asked in the shelter is, can one night staying in the shelter make a difference? How can you think that setting up a temporary stretcher in a church building is going to make a difference long term? Because they go back out into the big, wide, nasty world. Let me tell you one story. A couple of years ago in the shelter, I think it was 2020, we had a man come to us, and we'll call him Brian. And he'd come from up in the territories, working on a big station up there, being very skilled, and had an accident which landed him in hospital in Melbourne. He was flown thousands of kilometres down to Melbourne, had severe back injury, and then consequently surgery. At the end of that surgery, and during the pandemic, he was released from hospital and was homeless on the streets of Melbourne without anything. And because of the red tape surrounding his injury, he couldn't go back to his workplace. And so when we found him, when he came to us, 2 years later, he'd been on the street all of that time, and he still wasn't completely healed, but he was almost back to normal, almost back to the place where he could work. And when he rang me, he said, I just need one night's sleep. Can I stay in the shelter? Tomorrow I've got a work trial. I really need this job. I've been out of work for so long. I've got no money. I had a really rough night last night. I was mistaken for somebody that was thieving from one of the local businesses by the authorities. And I also almost got my head punched in by some other people that were sleeping rough. I just need one night's sleep. So I said, I think you better come stay with us. So he came and stayed with us, had a wonderful meal, enjoyed conversation with our cooks and with our volunteers, and regaled us with stories of being up north on the stations. Had that good night's sleep, got up at 6:30 before the morning shift came at 7 o'clock, put on his high-vis gear and went out the door and said, I'm going to go get this job. And I said, please let us know. Give us a call. And so later on in the day, I got a call and he said, I've got the job. And I'm sorry, I won't be back in the shelter because I've been offered a place to stay from one of my new workers, my new work colleagues. But could I come for tea? Because the cooks were talking about what they were making and it sounded really good and I really love it. can't remember what they were cooking. And that was just the one night that he stayed with us. And the story went on that he continued working until the red tape was over and he actually got a payout and bought a house close by. And so one night can actually make a huge difference. The little bit that we can do, that we give to God, he multiplies in incredible ways. I want to tell you another story from this year, if that's okay. Just stop me if I'm telling too many stories. There's plenty of them. This is a story from this year from a guest who's named George, we'll call him. And George has had a pretty rough life and was very, very sick when he came to us. He's staying on and off for most of the shelter this year, and we've just packed down last night. So we've just finished shelter after the 3 months. And one night he was in so much pain that he couldn't even hobble into where the shelter was. And we were contemplating whether we needed to call an ambulance or get him into hospital. It was that severe. And we managed to get him onto one of the stretcher beds, and the team that was there that night were running around cooking the food and getting everything ready, unpacking the beds and getting out the blankets and getting the games ready and all the things that they normally do. And I just went and sat with him after doing all the things that we could do for him. And I just said to him, can I pray for you? I'm not sure what else we can do. And he said, do you know that I'm a born again Christian? And I said, oh, no, I didn't know that. Yeah, I'd love to pray for you, I said. And he said, that'd be good. And so I prayed for him, and he'd been in so much pain that his fists were clenched like this, trying to hang on. And as I began to pray for him, he just opened up his hands like this and began to relax and began to unclench, and he began to be peaceful. And after I finished praying for him, I said to him, would it be too much if I sing for you? Because I'm a singer and worship leader as well. And he said, no, I'd like that. I said, what about I sing Amazing Grace? And he said, oh, I love that. I said, me too. And so I sang Amazing Grace just quietly in the corner. So our volunteers from the churches and from the community. So as I began to sing, tears just rolled down his cheeks, and I had a lot of trouble not joining him, I must say. And I sang song after song for about half an hour just quietly while everybody else moved around us and did what we normally do to set up the shelter. And then when I stopped, he just began to tell stories of childhood trauma and what had happened to him just quietly. And I just believe in that moment that God was doing something. God was healing. God was there and present. And that's one of those moments that take your breath away that I'll never forget from being in the shelter. There are so many. I could tell you a lot of stories, but let me tell you just a couple of moments as well. One of the continual things we've been told from people that are guests is, especially when there's only one guest in, which happens a bit, and they will say, I can't believe that you set this all up for me. I can't believe you bring all these people and make all this food, and you do this when there's just one person, just me. And it makes such a huge impact on them. It really shows them how precious they are. And we say we do this because we want to. Nobody pays us to. We want to do what we can. We want to share with you what we have. And it's a really, really precious thing. One final thing I'll share with you before there are any questions, or if you want me to cover anything else, is I often get asked to speak in our local schools about the work of the shelter. And we've had incredible support from our community, from our businesses, from our churches. It's really been amazing. And one of the things that we've been able to do together is I went and spoke in the local high school and spoke to the Year 12 students about some of these stories that I've told you, only a lot more stories. And I must have made the comment that one day I'd like to put these in a book. And so at the end of that time, they said, we'd like to do a different project with you than what's been done before. We'd like to put those stories in a book, like you said. Can we do that? And I said, okay, I've never done that before. And this before you, I'm not sure whether you'll be able to see that. This is actually a book of those stories, and they're all our images and stories of rural homelessness, both in Northern Victoria and Southern New South Wales. And they just helped us pull those together and create beautiful artwork. You might also be able to see on this front page, there's a couch. And that couch is actually really important. It's not a photoshopped couch. It's not one from somebody's photo stock. It's actually a photo that I was given a couple of years before the shelter began. And it was given to me by a young man called Nathan, who was in his 30s. And he'd been raised on the streets, homeless in Melbourne. And then he'd come up here. And by the time I met him, he'd been homeless on and off most of his life. And in the time that I knew him, he became very precious to not only us, but quite a few of the churches in town. He gave his heart to God. And we spent a long time talking about forgiveness for him and for other people, for him forgiving other people for what they'd done to him, and God's forgiveness for him for what he had also done. It was really precious. Tragically, he was killed on the street. And when we opened the shelter for the first time was when the trial for his murder was happening. And it was a really precious thing to tell these young people, the year 12s, his story, and to say that he gave us permission for this story to be told so that it would make a difference, because ultimately that's what we want to do. And on the back of it, on the back of our book, it just says, this could be you. And what we mean by that is that it could be you that is homeless. The statistics show that in 3 days' time, any one of us could be homeless. It could be us. But we also want to say it could be you. This could be your community, not Wangaratta. It could be, what have I got on the screen? Taungurong or Shepparton or Maroopin or Murchison or all of the other places, anywhere really. This could be you that does this collective response to homelessness, loneliness and heartache, is what we commonly say. This year, we've incredibly been able to have a daytime space as well, and that's called Zach's Place, which has been another part of our project and our partnership. Zach's Place is formed through the Ministries of God Squad from Wales in the UK, and we're also connected with the Victorian Council of Churches. So there are so many people and so many partnerships that we have that make this possible, and that's an incredible part of our story as well. And when I read those verses in Isaiah and I read those last words of the prophet saying God's words, saying, then you will call on me in that day and I will say, here I am. It's pretty often when I look into the eyes of a homeless person or I hear their voice and they are actually, Jesus with hands and feet in front of us. Pretty commonly we see ourselves as the hands and feet of Jesus. But when we read those words of Matthew as well, and it says, how you treat the least of these is how you treat me. And so the people that come and eat with us at the table, that sleep in our church buildings with us, it's like us being with Jesus. And it's really precious.
Thanks, Di. I mean, just want to sort of draw some threads there together before people perhaps ask questions. So what I'm hearing is there was this prior sense of need in the community and a strong faith commitment that this was something we ought to be doing something about. But then there was a model that and some resourcing or ideas, that a structure that came through Shelter One.
Stable One, yes.
Stable One.
Yeah.
And then, but then still this tremendous commitment from people just to do what they can as they can.
Yeah.
And
exactly right.
And this strong belief that in these vulnerable outsider people, we encounter Christ.
Yeah.
It's a lovely story.
Say we become shelter family. Yeah.
I think the process you talked about of making the beds together and that is really touching as well.
We've also written a couple of songs in the shelter because people come in and they bring whatever they like to do. And so some of us, that means we bring, guitars and other instruments. Some people bring other things that they create, and then we do things together. And what comes as a result is some really beautiful expressions of God's gifts through us.
All right, just a couple of questions perhaps from those online, and then we'll let Joan have her thing, and then we can come back and have a little, bring the whole thing together as well. Some questions for Di. Any questions or comments?
Yes, from Graham, Di. I think I heard you correctly before when you said the people who come to you are looking for people and they're looking for God. How do you know that they're looking for God? I ask that because, well, you know, the people I speak to and attempt to have faith conversations with aren't seemingly needy people, and they're certainly not homeless. But talking about God is quite anathema to them. It just goes right over their heads. And especially, you know, those who are atheist or haven't even given God a thought for many, many years.
I think it's what we read in the stories of Jesus, that when people are desperate, they're nearest to calling out to God. And so we're meeting people at their most desperate. And often one of their first questions of us is, why are you doing this? And that gives us a wonderful place to be able to talk about the why in language that they can understand. And so in our training, we talk about, you know, not using Christianese and using words that people can actually understand. And that's really, really powerful. So I think it is easy. It's probably very easy for us because we're meeting people in that place of need.
Di, Jenny from Shepparton. I'm interested in how the people come to you. I know a little bit, and I'm sure Joan will talk about how the people in Shepparton come to us. In Shepparton, there's a screening process. How do the people come to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Stable One has got some really great structures, and we basically have just set up all of their policies, procedures, their interview material. So we have a referral and intake team that does a guest interview with them. But prior to that, there's many different ways they come to us. Our community is great at handing out. We have shelter cards that go out absolutely everywhere. We have what we call our rough sleeper bags, and they came about as a conversation between me and a friend who's been homeless. A lot of the time I've known him. He's lived with us 3 times. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I said, what can we do to help? And he said, warm socks and beanies, Di, just need to get it into their hands. And he also said, and how come you can't do that shelter thing? Just do all the stuff they're asking you. I'm like, okay. So the rough sleeper bags have a message on the outside that says, you know, we just want you to have these. If you found them, they must be for you. Please stay in contact and please tell us what you need. And in them they have our contact details. So people call us from those rough sleeper bags. They call us from the shelter cards that are left everywhere. But ultimately, I've been a pastor in this community for more than 20 years. And I know many of the chaplains and ministers here. And so there's a lot of word of mouth and a lot of background of ministry here where people are already involved in the lives of people on the street. And their communication networks are way better than ours. Their word of mouth is incredible. And so if somebody finds a good thing, often you just get that first person that stays in the shelter for the year. And then the gossip spreads like wildfire and they begin to tell everybody else. Our biggest advocate this year was the guy I spoke about before, George. And he just, every night he took cards and he said, I need some more cards. I've given them all away. And many of the people who came stay with us were because of him, because he'd referred us in that way. And last night at our shelter party, we invited all our volunteers in and had a big party, and he was there. And he got up and gave this little impromptu speech thanking everybody, which was gold. They also get referred to us through agencies. At the beginning of the season, I send out probably 70 emails to all our agencies. And because this is our and police and hospital and mental health and suicide network and veterans support. So because a lot of us have been in ministry for a long time, then the networks are pretty good at getting that information out to people. So there's formal and informal referrals that come.
Thank you. Thanks, Di. Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. I'll pass over to Joan now to talk, and then we'll come back with some questions towards the end. Okay, thanks very much, Di.
No worries.
So Joan, welcome.
Thank you, Brian. Shepparton has a long history of providing food, at least for the hungry, and down by the lake and ironically, this was started by one of our Muslim restaurateurs. Years ago, the Uniting Church, mostly through Lorraine and the youth group, took over doing Fridays. So we were helping with that a good while ago. But then COVID came and that made all sorts of changes. So if I could have my PowerPoint, please, Brian. In 2020, we met with people from Stable One. Jenny Willits came up. She's actually from the UK. She lives in Mount Evelyn and started Stable One there, but she brought the idea with her from the UK. She met with various ministers, representatives from churches and the Interchurch Council. Later, she provided the initial 3 hours training for us. We set up a committee, a project committee, and a board, and we established fundraising. And as you can see, this bus was used, and we, from the funds, we bought this little trailer, which is actually parked outside our church in this and all the other photos, times that you'll see it. So this was meant to advertise us. The logo on the rear is the Greater Shepparton Winter Night Shelter logo. So in 2020, we just had a limited program with accommodation for men in our church with dinner and breakfast. But it was even more limited because we only had 1 or 2 come. We did better in 2021, even though we had COVID. Both years we checked, and we had plenty of volunteers who were willing to continue through 7 nights of the week. So we had in 2021 7 churches offering accommodation, and each had a venue coordinator and the volunteers, 3 cooks, 4 for the evening shift, 3 for overnight, 3 for breakfast, and a couple of drivers. We didn't do driving in the morning because all the venues except 2 were very close to the Salvation Army, where they would have been taken anyway. So there were only the evening drivers. Last year, we had guests, it had been resolved much earlier that we would have men only. Originally, it was going to be 20 as the minimum age, but we put that down to 18. All have to be recommended by Beyond Housing. That has had perhaps some unintended consequences, because there have been some people who we have thought might have joined us, but they have been reluctant to go through Beyond Housing for whatever reason. They met at the Salvation Army at 5:30, and then the bus and trailer came round to whichever church they were going to, where they had dinner, bed and breakfast. Evening entertainment, which they provided. Some of the venues provided films. There was a big pack of games and other things. Here they set up and pack up their own stretcher. By that I mean they're responsible for it. There was a good deal of sharing. And each of them had one of those big, I call them Chinese bags, which is terribly disrespectful of me, but you know, the big white zip ones with red and blue checks. Each one of them had one of those, and where they could put their bedding and actually their personal goods. Sorry about that. This isn't my original PowerPoint. It got disappeared just as I was sending it to Brian this morning, so there'll be some strange things. Now, the trailer in 2021 carried these very sturdy metal framed stretchers, doonas and pillows and linen for them, towels, lots of toilet requisites, clothing. By clothing, I mean socks, beanies, scarves. There were some jumpers, other things, and then the big bags for guests. And they were named, and they could leave them in the trailer from night to night. On Monday nights, they slept in the old church at the Uniting Church. This year, we had 7 churches offering accommodation, and it worked very much as through 2021. But it ran for 1 week only because we had only 1 guest. So we worked out that a different model would be preferable. And here it is. Would be for evening meals only, would be at 5:30, 7 nights a week, and it would be at the barbecue shelter down at the lake. As you can see, this is open and airy and doesn't provide much shelter at all. And on occasion, when there's been rain, there's been a stream running through, half of it from the left to the right and down. It was doing that again Monday evening this week. Now, the process as worked out was that the bus and trailer had to be collected from the Salvation Army and returned there. So most of the churches don't use it, and they bring their own requirements. It's simple to put them in 2 or 3 plastic boxes and put them in your boot. And I think, as far as I know, there's only 1 church that actually uses the bus and the trailer. Now, the trailer this year carries the requirements for serving meals, urns and things for making drinks, packs for surplus food, toiletries and warm clothing, and so on. So it's changed partly the content, but there are plenty of things. Oh, there's bedding there as well too. Now, we think this year that the new model is more successful because it allows women as well as men to receive meals. The numbers have increased, but the maximum number of people we've had over the 7 nights has been about 20. I actually did that count last week, and I've seen a couple of people this week who I hadn't seen before. So we may be up to 22 or 24 or something like that. But the story has been that guests return every night or most of the nights each week. So we've got a continuing presence with some coming and going. Thanks. So the 7 churches on Sunday, the Seventh-day Adventists, we're the Monday. Tuesday is at Marupna, and it's either St Mary's Catholic Church or the Uniting Church. Wednesday, St Brenson's. The church that was doing it Thursday mostly doesn't, but several others help filling in there. And Friday, St Mel's, and Saturday, the Salvation Army. Volunteers need to be trained, and the training takes 3 hours. Cooks also have to have the food handler certificate. Shift leads. And I'm going back to the original training. I just want you to know what happened to happen. No, it's just partly because I'm not using the original. The shift leads also needed first aid and CPR training, and if they're overnight, as well as those 3, also the fire wardens and the venue coordinator had to have the whole lot. But winter night shelter paid for the first aid fees. With the new model, the volunteers cook and bring the meals. Occasionally, there's one lot that sometimes serves sausages, so they're cooked at the barbecues, but the rest of us bring soup and a main, and very often a dessert as well. serve the meals, engage with the guests, pack surplus meals for distribution, clean and tidy the area, and then return the trailer to the Salvation Army if they're using it. Monday nights, I coordinate it, and I work with a team of 4 volunteers. 5 of these come from our congregation. 2 of them are on screen tonight. The other 13 come from either other churches or the community. And in this group of 13, there are some who work up to 3 different nights in the week. This is Monday night. And as you can see, it's not very light. And that was well after 6. We bring 3-course meals. We meet the guests and serve meals, pack them, tidy up. And the lights eventually come on, but they're on a sensor. And because there's a highway opposite, quite often there's enough light for the sensors not to work. So we're working in the dark, often darker even than we were when I took that shot on Monday. I didn't mean to take any of our guests, but there's one, and just giving another view of where we are. 3 of Monday's helpers, 1 from the community, 2 from our congregation, 1 online tonight. Why do we do all this? I was hungry and you gave me food. I was hungry and you gave me no food. Matthew 25 has always been a very strong impetus for Christian action. But it's occurred to me that perhaps we should be finding the charge, the commissioning, the request earlier. And so I suggest that we look at Mark 6. You give them something to eat. You might recall Jesus saying that in the deserted place, which was very crowded at the time. It seems to me that if we are giving them something to eat, then we may recognise the Christ in the least, those ones around us, among us, and with us. I'm not really telling stories tonight, but one of our homeless ones has come to church once, asked for a Bible when she got there, slept in last Sunday, has already booked her ride with me next Sunday, and will be back. Whether any of the others join her, I don't know, but she is quite keen. Now I'd like to pray the prayer, please, Brian.
Do you want to say that to finish off, we could perhaps close with a prayer? I thought if perhaps some questions around it.
All right, if there are
that
questions.
could be a nice way to close the session, if that's okay with you. Or,
Yeah, all right.
So 2 different models, and again, so males and females, and again, sense of success and satisfaction in doing it.
Yes, I think so. I've dropped by nearly every night of the 3 months that we've been doing it, just to say hi. And I'm a board member, as I said before, and I just thought it might be a little bit of encouragement, and to say hi to our guests too. And I've been hugely impressed by what I've seen, by the excellence of our meals. Well, it doesn't matter which of the 8 churches who are involved, 2 different ones on Tuesdays. Doesn't matter which one is the food. Food is always top class. It's always a soup and a main, and very often a dessert of some sort as well. And our guests are very sure that we are feeding them the sorts of meals that we eat, and they find that hugely impressive. We're not just giving them some leftovers after a restaurant's closed or passed its first day from Coles, which is the sort of other goods that they get so evenly. So they're really very happy about the food. And even though we're in that very unpromising sort of a shelter, which can have a southerly gale blowing up the highway, and it's absolutely perishing then, whether it's going to be frosty or not. But we had a northerly a couple of Mondays ago, and it was almost equally as cold. It's a terrible place, but it's all we've got so far. We are working to have somewhere better next year. We also did plan to have a day shelter this year, which would have taken place at the Salvation Army probably, but for a variety of reasons that didn't happen. But they can always go to the Salvos Monday to Friday during the day. There's a shower there that they can use, a washing machine, and on Wednesdays they can join the community lunch if they want to. So some of them do that, others prefer not to.
All right, open to some questions. That's what. Lorraine, you've got your hand up.
Di, in Wangaratta, is your shelter men only, or is it men and women? And is there an age limit?
Men and women, right from the very beginning.
How do you manage? Do you all sleep in the same? I think one of the issues in Shepparton was that we couldn't provide separate sleeping quarters. Do you provide separate sleeping quarters, or is it all in the?
We all sleep in the one building. So our overnight shift, as you've heard, is 3 people overnight, with 2 people staying awake and 1 person sleeping, 1 volunteer. And so that volunteer will be, in that sleeping space. And the other volunteers that stay awake, they're within sight. They're very close by. And so men and women may be up, different ends of the hall or the church building that we're sleeping in. But they're all in the same space. And some people think that's actually quite safe because there's no hidey holes. So particularly the people that I'm speaking to that feel quite unsure, they actually feel a bit more secure because we're there. There's a volunteer sleeping, just 2 beds up, and you hear every movement, every noise. So I actually think it's a real benefit. And it's also wonderful because, if there's somebody who doesn't consider that they're male or female, we don't have to navigate deciding where somebody fits in, in this room or in that room. It's just everybody together, volunteers, guests, male, female. So it's been a really great decision.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Whereas we decided that we would not have women with men because that can raise some other problems, because many of the women also have children.
Right, Anne, where's Anne? There she is.
Di, just wondering about your rough bags that you have.
Yep.
Where do the supplies for them come from?
They're all donations, and a lot of them are sourced. Well, people just approach us and say, what do you need for the rough sleeper bags? We've had both Year 9s and Year 12s from the local schools that have gone to motels and asked for if they've got any shampoo and conditioners that, that are old stock, or they've fundraised for that. There's been lots of donations from local businesses. So we've never been at a lack for those. And whenever we do need something, to say we run out of socks, which we did this year, we just put a message on our Facebook page and said, we really need size 8 to whatever it is, men's socks, 8 to 10 and 11 to 13. And they just kind of appeared during the week and we gave them away straight away. The rough sleeper bags are left. We started this in COVID. Kind of left like a scavenger hunt, if you'll pardon the word, in that we leave them in the places where we know that there are homeless people sleeping. They can also go and get them from, there's some in businesses, some in agencies, but we find that really breaks down some of the stigma about them going to an agency, wherein they see one of those bags and they go, somebody's thinking about me, somebody put that just there for me to find. And then we tell them that actually they're the ones that are the treasure.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I was going to ask where you left them, because that's terrific. Yeah.
And often children have been involved in putting them together, because obviously we can't have under 18s volunteer in the shelter. So the rough sleeper bags team is something that families choose to do together and kids get involved with.
Yeah. And so people can, it's best if people find what you need and all of that on Facebook. That's quite a good outlet for people.
Yeah, or ask us, because often we get donated things that are just too big for the bags, or then, you know, they're not what the people need. And we say to people, actually, it's much better to ask homeless people, what do you need, than assume. And often they only take out of the bag what they need and they leave the rest behind. And I think that's a bit of a foreign concept for us who think we may know what people need, but it's much better to ask them.
And sorry, one more question. Did you find that people have their own communities out on the streets, as far as sleeping together and sharing a space, and they didn't come to you as a result of that?
Yeah, they do, because it's familiar to them, and they know the people, and they know, you know, that kind of comfortable space, whereas we're a bit unknown, and they have, you know, many fears about coming in amongst Christians, about sleeping in a church building, about being with people who may judge them. And so a lot of our training was telling stories to try and unpack the stigma and the myths, and to help people to get to know the stories of those that are homeless. And even last night at our shelter party, we had one of our guests from last year came and said, I didn't stay in the shelter this year because I didn't need to. And you guys changed my life last year, and talk about what it was actually like coming into the shelter the first time. She also turned up at one of our trainings impromptu and shared what it was like to walk into the shelter for the first time. And that's really powerful, because we haven't experienced that, so we don't know what it's like, and it helps us understand.
Thanks.
Cindy.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I think what you do is amazing work, and quite humbling to know that people do that. My question is, the 3 months for the winter shelter, is there any preparation or conversation or acknowledgement that come the mid-August that people are it's going to close, and that network of warmth and friendliness and a regular meal and that support they've had is coming to an end for that particular year? Is there something that sort of gets introduced, or how do they make the transition stage, and how do you guys make that transitional phase from a winter into a spring into a summer, where these people still need a good bed, safe area, good food and all that thing? How does that get handled?
Is that a question for Joan or for me? Or
Both, either.
Go for it, Joan.
We made it very clear that it would only be for the 3 months, but we have also, because that's the stable one model, and I actually proposed at the board that we might have extended it another month, and did not receive a very good reception, except that eventually they said, we'll talk about it next year, and we may extend it for a 4th month. It seemed to me pretty harsh to be cutting them off at the 31st of August, given the weather at the time, when many of us could have gone on. But then I was talking quite by chance today with the coordinator of another night, and she said, oh, I'm so glad it's over. I needed to finish that. So while some of us coordinators and some of the volunteers longing to go on, I had 18 people in my team, so they get to go about once a month, and they're all wanting, or almost all of them are wanting to work once a week. So that's pretty hard for them. But then there are some others who just find 3 months a long time once a week. So it's a difficult sort of a thing. But we did prepare our people, and we've had this strange experience that on Tuesday night, a group from, well, they've said they're from another church, just set up on the barbecue next to the big meal that our lot were preparing, and they were cooking sausages, and nobody knew where the sausages were going to or what. But I was told today that Tuesday night, they gave all the sausages to the ones who'd already had their meal, so they could take them away. But they've also said they'll be there every Tuesday night from now on, so that we know that there will be some sort of food. But there are plenty of other places in Shepparton where people can go for food if they wish. They just have to walk a little further. And the lake, shelter at the lake itself, is too far for some of them to walk. So it's not actually the only food place.
Right, time for one more question. Jenny, you had your hand up.
Oh, Di didn't get a chance to answer that one.
Sorry.
I can say that very quickly. So this is my first night after 3 months of not being with our homeless people, and I can say that I, for one, and probably the rest of our volunteers, are grieving a bit. We become this family, and the amazing thing is that we actually will stay in each other's lives. And some of them were in my life beforehand as a pastor and chaplain that spends a lot of time with homeless and street people, and some of them are new faces. But we know where they are around the town. It's easy to find them. And the 5 church buildings where we have slept in, they're familiar places to them. So they keep turning up there because they're a safe place. So they'll stay in our world. And Zach's place is open quite a lot during the week. So that's also a place they can come find us. Short answer.
Thank you.
Thanks, Di. Jenny.
Just a comment, and it follows on a little bit from what Di has just said about the connection, the ongoing connection. I work in the op shop, and there's probably 5 or 6 of those men who come into the op shop on a regular basis. One in particular, I think we've probably given him about 8 pairs of shoes. I keep saying to him, "What have you done with them this time?"
I know exactly who you mean.
I leave them outside and they get lost. And another one comes in looking for jewelry for his girlfriend, which is hilarious. So,
Yep.
So there is that ongoing connection for some of them in a very informal way with the op shop. And I think they too meet other folk from around the church.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and at the end of the shelter, if you release, well, we hope to have 150 people. This year we had only 60. But when you release that amount of people into the community that have relationships, that have got their eyes open for those who are rough sleeping, you've got people that are looking to continue that community from a volunteer, basis, as well as the guests looking for us. It's a good recipe for community.
Amazing. Thank you.
No worries.
Right. Thanks very much, everybody. Our time is gone, and I'd ask Joan if she would lead us in the prayer that she prepared.
Yes, it's a mixture of something I read and something I added and rewrote. So you might like to join me. Lord Jesus, you were born among us, poor, humble, and dependent. Open our eyes, our hearts, and our hands to welcome you, those who are hungry, in all who are homeless or lonely, in refugees, the poor and the sick. Let our love be always free and spontaneous, like your constant love for us, that you may welcome us to your everlasting kingdom. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much to Di and to Joan, and God bless you in what you've been doing, and hope you get some rest and recuperation.
Brian, may I say one thing, please, because I've realised I left it off the second PowerPoint. I came across a brilliant sculpture, a bronze, that's in the University of Toronto. A man lying on a park bench, head covered with a blanket, just lying there. And the only identification is the feet. each of which has a sizable nail hole. Naturally, that was on my PowerPoint. I can email it to you. It's quite stunning.
Thank you.
Thank
Yes,
you.
Jesus, it's beautiful.
Mm.
Thanks, Joan, Di,
Thank you, Joan.
Brian.
Thank you.
Diane,
Thank
thank
you for having us.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks.
Sleep
Bless you.
tight,
Good night.
everyone.
Good night, all.
Stay well.